Day 1008 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 735,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,580 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 14 tanks, 48 APVs, 21 artillery, 1 MLRS, and 1 air defense system. And we must now head over to the biggest news of the day, of the week really, as we're already taking another look at the Russian ruble, with these staggering price movements leading to an even further devaluing of the currency. And it's getting quite difficult to keep up with the pace, with the changing of price movements every hour. As just yesterday, the price was 107 rubles per US dollars, but just now we've seen it jump up to a staggering 113.11 rubles per US dollar, which is truly an astonishing real-time change in events. Which is something that, once again, is a situation that significantly diminishes the purchasing power of Russians, resulting in increased costs, which leads to subsequently higher prices, which then leads to further inflation or hyperinflation if the government doesn't intervene. But that's just the thing. The Russian government has already been intervening with control measures since the economic sanctions began, with the Russian government now coming to deal with the depletion of their sovereign wealth fund alongside other continuously exhausted measures, which could start to put Russia in an increasingly problematic position, where they see that eroding value of their currency leading to skyrocketing costs for goods and services, not to mention their industrial base and their military industrial base too. And so to this hyperinflation scenario that could outplay, which would mean, long story short, there is no war. And there's no historical exception to this rule when sustained hyperinflation has occurred at time of a country waging war, as the hyperinflation severely undermines military operations, which equals prohibitively expensive military equipment, making it increasingly difficult to sustain military operations, leading to critical military supply chain disruptions, thereby leading to a need for a strategic withdrawal or massive change in tactics, or even a push for diplomatic resolutions. Not exactly a great position to negotiate from. And also note, it's never mattered if a country in hyperinflation is rich in natural resources, because the functioning economy is too far gone by that point. Unless, of course, the natural resources they have, such as oil, can somehow magically turn into some sort of wonder weapon, used to squirt at their enemies in some sort of a miraculous defeat. And Russia should have ideally stepped in by now, selling the remainder of their gold reserves in back channels, or selling off their foreign currency reserves. So surely we will see an interest rate increase by the Russian central bank soon. And it is interesting because both Putin and his Minister of Defense, Belousov, they're both economists. So they should be well ahead of the curve and not just biting their nails behind the scene. Either way, Russia needs to do something quick, and it's now very important to avoid a run on the banks with a Russian bank collapse. So they'll need to get a little bit creative, which probably includes stripping the nation and their private citizens of their wealth en masse to make up the difference. But obviously not a popular political move there. So off you go, Putin. You've got a lot of work on your plate right now. Then headed to the map and starting out in Russia's Bashkortostan region, as reports confirmed that an air raid alert was triggered in Salavat as Ukrainian drones were initially reported to be targeting the Gazprom Salavat refinery. Russian air defenses were engaged, only for it to be later confirmed that the aerial vehicle was incorrectly identified as a Ukrainian drone, to find out that it was a Russian AN-2 airplane, flying over the restricted airspace. prompting those air defense measures. And this is not even the first time an incident like this has occurred inside of Russia, as this type of event happened about 6 weeks ago in Russia's Murmansk Oblast in the far north, where Russian air defenses engaged 2 small Russian Cessna-type planes mistakenly, and then just about a week before that incident, an agricultural plane was shot down somewhere else near this direction, actually. So once again, we see the Russian paranoia and lack of the Russian military inter-networked communication with civil aviation bodies to advise of restricted airspace and flight routes, which evidently continues to be an afterthought. It's quite disgraceful. Then headed a bit southwest as Rostov reports another restless night as UAV drones attacked at Lenivin, northeast of the city of Rostov-on-Don. Some debris was noted, with the local governor claiming 10 UAVs were shot down, and where the target appears to have been a suspiciously nearby airstrip, which houses the 30th Independent Composite Transport Aviation Regiment, with no further information yet on the outcome of that latest attack. Then headed to Belgorod on the map, as Russia continues their strategic ambiguity as it relates to the use of North Korean soldiers in this war, because we've come across this Russian Telegram post of an advertisement for a soccer friendship match between, very coincidentally might I add, the Chechen Kadyrov and North Korean players. So just as a refresher, Chechen units are some ways away behind the front lines deployed in both Belgorod and the Kursk regions, where they typically employ the tactic of setting up buffer troops between themselves and the Ukrainian forces to keep their heinies as safe as possible. So as far as this soccer match goes, not playing in North Korea or Chechnya, but rather suspiciously close to their main lines of military operations. As for the telegram, I also enjoyed the message below the image, stating, quote, "I saw this on the street, I didn't think such a thing could ever happen now, well, who's going to watch?" So it seems that there's not a lot of enthusiasm for the match either. And I'm not surprised, the thing probably doubles as a forced recruitment campaign as well. Then briefly headed to Kursk, as the Russian Ministry of Defense recently confirmed for the first time that ATACMS missiles were used in the region, with some photos sharing the remainder of the rockets or the missiles, which is no surprise to anyone, we already knew this. But as you see here, the Russian MOD almost never missing a chance to make a propaganda piece out of something, as it seems they placed one of the rocket's components, which is the self-propelled stage booster, and not the 900 or so sub-munitions payload, putting one conveniently next to a Pantsir air defense system of the armed forces of Russia, just a stone's throw away. Never mind the fact that the Pantsir is not much used against an ATACMS ballistic missile, so I would strongly hypothesize that they placed the rocket right in front of the Pantsir, rubbed a little bit of dirt right in front of it perfectly in view of both the rocket and the Pantsir to make it appear more genuine in terms of neutralizing the threat, but somehow neglecting the entire remainder of the ground around it, which was evidently completely unfazed by the 1,100-pound booster or spent stage component of the ATACMS missile that would be coming out at a considerable pace. Also, the debris, if you will, seems to be well intact to suggest it completed its terminal phase, likely hitting its target rather than being intercepted. Also, it's interesting how, being supposedly a sensitive military site for air defense, they forgot to blur the background, as they normally would. So things don't really seem to add up here. It's the little things in life, isn't it? Then, also in Kursk, we saw some more footage of Russian armoured vehicles and cars being destroyed in real time. Then same situation again in the Kursk, with various Russian vehicles destroyed by drones in the early morning. Then headed to Ukraine, with more reports coming out of Kupiansk on the Ukrainian forces successfully driving out the Russian military and regaining full control of the city's outskirts in the east, after a series of relentless counterattacks. Now, Russian channels acknowledged the defeat, labeling their withdrawal as a quote-unquote disgrace after the failed attempt to capture the city. Then further down on the map, Ukrainian forces reported on reclaiming ground near Kreminna, bolstering their defensive positions, specifically east of Torska. Then for a moment headed to Chasiv Yar, where Ukrainian soldiers from the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade successfully repelled a Russian offensive, destroying a mammoth total of 7 BMD-4 vehicles, which are amphibious infantry fighting vehicles originating from post-Cold War Russia. We've seen Russia's use of them here and there throughout the war, not that much, and of course never to the levels of the BMPs, the Soviet stockpiles of the BMPs. Now, I believe Russia has an estimated 400 to 600 of these in stock, bearing in mind that was before the full-scale invasion commenced. And I also expect that these ones don't represent a lot of bang for buck, costing slightly over $1 million each, with production lines starting in 2004. And interesting fact, they're also the only tracked-wheeled platform with an updated design that was produced in any meaningful numbers in the post-Soviet era. And that includes not just infantry fighting vehicles, but also SPGs, so the self-propelled howitzers, and tanks. Sure, Russia upgraded a whole bunch of their existing older Soviet tanks, but this level of diminished output really speaks to Russia's lack of production capacity after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then headed further down the map to the southeast, where things are looking rather incremental on the Kharkova front, one level down. Though I'd say there is a fair expectation that Russia is looking to take the Velika Novosilka town by way of taking the western flank at Rivnopol as a means to perform a maneuver warfare tactic for encircling the town. They'd also consider the approach from the north at Rozdolna, but that's potentially a little less feasible at the moment. Then taking a look on the map, because somewhere in the east, and a bit of a follow-up to yesterday's update in fact, because Russian sources circulated a video claiming 2 Ukrainian tanks were destroyed by mines on the Pokrovsk front. But in a twist, these are actually 2 Russian T-90M tanks that Ukrainian soldiers confirm just a bit earlier were lost in battle. And taking a look at these tanks, you can notice the distinction with the welded turret design, which is a hallmark of the T-90A and newer models. There's also the Contact 5 ERA blocks arrangement on the turret, the thermal sights and sensors, and the low profile and cannon. They're just cute little tanks really, quite a bit lighter than your standard Western tank. Then, also in the east, Ukrainian soldiers from the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade repelled another Russian offensive, seeming to make light work of those engagements. Then headed across to a little bit of news today, and just to take a quick look at this snazzy Ukrainian drone of an FPV drone carrier, where this fixed wing and increased range frontline mother drone or mothership is capable of transporting up to 6 FPV drones at a time, used as a means to give the baby drones not only further physical range, but also provides a radio relay repeater signal on the mothership to allow for that extended baby FPV drone range profile. Very innovative. Then to some Russian hardware news, where the impact of FPV drones on Russian motor transport is evident in recent data, highlighting a doubling of Russian Bukhanka vans lost to Ukrainian FPV strikes, as can be seen over the past 12 months. And when taken with the additional context of total Russian trucks lost to FPV drones, you start to see a trend in the decline of the usage of the more fit-for-purpose Russian trucks, showing how the Bukhanka vans are really the new backup approach to Russian logistics, with an additional report detailing how fuel, then artillery shells are the biggest slices of what their motor transport moves. Certainly not the most efficient option with these Bukhanka vans. But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Then to some more news with Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chair of Russia's Security Council and former Russian Prime Minister, has posted a new update on his Telegram channel where he outlined a new red line, as he stated that the transfer of nuclear weapons to Ukraine would be regarded as an attack on Russia. Okay then. I'm not sure tensions were expected to escalate in that direction anyway. And although I've lost count of how many red lines this makes now, this unusual statement, based out of fear, probably refers to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum where the US, the UK, and Russia provided security guarantees to Ukraine due to them giving up their nuclear arsenal, which at the time was actually the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. So, given the fact that Russia has completely violated this agreement now, in fact, the Kremlin itself called this a null and void agreement back in 2014, essentially due to losing pro-Kremlin presidents in Ukraine and considering Ukraine and Kyiv an illegal regime. But it's all very confusing, this Russian logic, as we've seen Zelensky and Putin sit down at a negotiation table summit in Paris back in 2019, with Putin making no mention of Ukraine's government as being illegitimate around these years, and seemingly open to negotiations. Although, as you might guess, these negotiations, this summit, didn't lead to anything positive. So why does this all tie into Drunk Medev? Well, it seems Ukraine might technically have a renewed or valid claim to updating their nation's weapon status back to the nuclear variety, or from Russia's perspective at least, where they are filled with paranoia now. But hey, I'm sure Ukraine is willing to make a compromise now. So let's downgrade any potential nuclear Ukraine status and give them, I don't know, JASSMs or ground-adapted Tomahawk cruise missiles instead. Seems more than fair. So that's it for today, guys. I've been spending a lot of time looking into the ruble today, where those price movements really escalated quite quickly. It's just a fascinating topic that really captures the imagination for what could be. So that's it for today. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, support, all of those really helpful things, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!